We are delighted to have as our speaker Stephanie McCullough. She's the founder of Sophia Financial and co-host of the award-winning Take Back Retirement podcast. She also happens to be one of Investopedia's top 10 financial advisors of 2023. And Stephanie really does a tremendous job of providing non-judgmental, truly holistic financial planning for professional women. And I'm guessing she'll help the men too if you call.
Yes.
Well, welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Mim. This is such an important topic. I'm excited to talk about it.
Yep. So today is all about solo aging, which is a pretty hot topic. So maybe we can start out with you defining what is solo aging.
Yeah, well, I heard this statistic years ago, and I don't know what the source was, but it has really stuck with me that 80% of men die married and 80% of women die single, which means that even if you're not solo at some point in your life, odds are that the women are going to end up solo down the road. So to me, solo means an adult, a household of one, right? Never married or widowed or divorced, or, maybe I've got several couples where there's an older spouse that's maybe 10, 12 years older than the younger spouse. Chances are, one of them will predecease the other. I mean, chances are for all of us, that's true. And then I think we have to also talk about couples or individuals with no children. Because when we talk about aging and kind of caregiving and stepping in for support, often it's the kids who are on the front lines and the default assumed people who are going to help support. So that's another factor.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I think the statistic is approximately 20% of female executives are not married and have no kids.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, that's a big number. And again, there's no right or wrong about it. It's just saying what's the plan, for that particular person. I think it's also important too. You brought up divorce and it gray divorce. People in their 60s, this is like something to think about if you are or know somebody that's going through a divorce and later in their life, you really do need to have some kind of uh, professional thought process and plan put in place so that you can age well, that there is enough money there for you
Yeah.
should you need care as you get older. So I think that's really helpful. I mean, most of us in some way or another may be, a solo ager,
Yeah.
um,
Odds are.
and right, or know someone who will be. And again, we don't want them to run out of money. We want to make sure that they have the resources around them to age safely. And maybe the most important thing is to make sure that if something should happen, that your wishes are being carried out.
Yep.
So a plan, particularly with a good, solid financial care plan behind you, is extraordinarily important for all of us. So let's talk a little bit about some of these differences, right? Between what you would think of as like maybe traditional partner planning around retirement versus planning if you're going to be a solo ager.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start with one that might not be intuitive, but the fact that a solo ager, an individual person, doesn't have someone to talk about money things with or to help them figure things out or even just a sounding board. So what I've seen from our single women clients especially is that they kind of spin around in their own heads on the money stuff because there's a lot of shame involved with admitting that maybe we don't know, even though I don't think there should be because no one teaches us this stuff. But there's still there are more barriers to becoming well informed and finding the resources because you are on your own. So that's one. And then, of course, financially, you're just relying on your own resources, right? I was talking to a client last week and she was saying, she's divorced and she said, all I have is all I have, right? There's no backup plan. There's no other individual there whose income, social security, assets can help me. This is it. So, I mean, that's a big piece of it, right? Well, where's the safety net? What you've got is what you've got.
Well, and I think it's important too when we say safety net, is that safety net specific to your situation? Which again goes back to why you really it just makes sense to talk to somebody who has the expertise, right?
Mhm.
Because we all want different things as we
Yeah.
age. There may be different goals. Maybe you are going to want to move into a, senior living community of some kind for that kind of freedom. It's not just about going into memory care. Like there are some really great options around that. But even just looking at those financial differences for yourself as a solo ager, is aging in place or wherever you may live right now the best solution? Is it the most financially
Right.
viable solution?
Yep.
And versus doing that comparison. And the time to do it is before you have to make that decision, right?
Oh, the time to do any of this planning is before there's a crisis, for sure.
Right.
Right. And when we think about it, we might think, oh, I'm only in my 50s, only in my 60s. I'm a healthy 70-year-old. Crisis can strike at any moment. My husband's aunt was out to lunch with her granddaughter a couple of weeks ago, tripped on one of those little things in a parking lot that stopped the cars, broke her
Mhm.
hip. Right? Like this was not the plan. She's the youngest sibling, but she's the one, like things happen. We all know this. We've all seen it.
Right.
Um,
And it's hard, right? We always, oh, well, I put it off. Well, I really don't want to think about it. I think it's if we can reframe this
mhm.
more around what is the life I want to live?
Yes.
Do I want to have control over my choices? Do
Yes.
I want to have the peace of mind of knowing that that plan's there if the unexpected happens? And versus, oh, this means I'm getting very old and decrepit.
Right.
And that's not
Right.
really the case. I mean, there are folks that I know that in their 70s and even early 80s get a knee replacement, right? And they recover from that and they're back and they're traveling and they're living their best life, but they have a plan around that recovery time.
Yep.
We thought through those financial pieces, which, again, gives you more stability. But when you are a solo ager, as we're talking about today, right? You may not have the kid to stop by or, the spouse or the sibling
Yep.
potentially. You may not live close to them, right? It may even just be a matter of geography.
Yeah, totally. And
So,
and really, I'm glad you talked about reframing it, right? Because it is about so often what we do in financial planning is thinking about what could go wrong. What could go wrong from an investment standpoint, from a financial standpoint? What could go wrong with your plan for life? Like, it's not admitting that bad things is going to happen. It's recognizing that anything could happen. And if we've tried to think about as many possible outcomes as we can, even if something totally out of left field comes up, at least we've thought through things and we have some safeguards in place.
right, 100%. And there's so many things that we sometimes don't think about when
Yeah.
we think about solo aging. And there was a very interesting report that we saw, probably came out right after COVID-ish, that said that 90% of people in their late 50s want to age at home. 90%. That's a huge number.
That's a huge number.
But it'd be very interesting to figure out if those people actually understand all the questions they should be asking themselves. Because we think about, well, do I have a handicapped bathroom or, those pieces, but we don't think about, well, if I'm aging in this house for another 15, 20 years, are there other capital expenses
Hmm.
that we haven't thought about? Are there going to be increases in taxes, like, if you school tax, whatever it is, right? So all of that has to be figured into that kind of financial planning. Um, and, do you have a pension? To your point, if you don't have that, not a spouse, you don't have the other option of somebody else's social security check coming in.
Yep.
And frankly, in the world that we're in, we really don't know
Right.
where we're going to be 4 or 5 or 6 years from now. So I think the plan part of it too is also understanding that it doesn't have to be written in stone.
Yes.
Get your plan in place. You can always change it.
Absolutely. Planning, right? We treat it as a verb, not a noun. It's not a big old binder you stick on the shelf and never look at again. It's an ongoing process. And to that point, I think another barrier, Mim, to tackling this is that it feels overwhelming. Oh, I got to do how many things? I've got to like line up 75 different things. Hey, every step that you do is so much better than not having done it.
Right. And I think it's important, that we're very passionate about this, as I know you are as well. It's why you want to have quality guidance, as you're making those decisions. I don't care how smart you are. I'm not a plumber. Right? Like I can read all about plumbing all day long, but frankly, that's not going to make me, an expert plumber. And I think it's really interesting in terms of aging well. aging in the way you want to, reducing those risks, making sure your voice is going to get heard, right, is important to all of us. But why wouldn't you want to have somebody who has decades of experience standing next to you to help you think about questions maybe that you haven't asked yourself? And, we're very big on talking about making sure that you are given the information to make the best choice for you.
Yes,
Not about telling you what to do. It's about
absolutely.
understanding what your options are and, having that kind of expertise to ask those questions, whether they're legal or financial or medical or living arrangements or whatever it is. But so much of this foundationally comes down to, do I have the financial stability to age in the way that I want to age?
Yeah, and
And
I think there's different price points for each option too, right? It's not like I can afford it or I can't afford it. I think there's different versions. And once we know like, oh, I would like my life to look like A with these factors, or I would really like to have an opportunity to have these experiences or feel such a certain way, then we can back into, okay, at what price point, where can we do this or what it might be, right? There are factors that are changeable once we're clear on the goal.
right. And I think the other side of that is again having people that you trust with all the volatility that's going on so that when something comes up in the news or you see another commercial, that you can go back to a credible source,
Yeah.
get the right information for you.
And each of us has only had the experiences we've had, right? We haven't aged yet. Maybe we've seen family members or friends go through, but that's still a limited sample size, right? Going to a trusted professional who's seen many different possibilities and many different, honestly, potential roadblocks or hiccups that could happen, as well as on the positive side, potential solutions, I think is a huge value.
Yeah. So I think it'd be really interesting for the audience to get a little bit of an idea when you're looking at the different financial pieces. What are those financial pieces? Like when somebody comes to you and says, okay, I really don't know what's going on. What do you typically ask for in terms of helping them start to think about what's going to be best for them?
Well, I mean, we always start with the qualitative stuff, right? Tell me about you and your people and your life and what you love and what you worry about. And then at some point we've got to look at the numbers, and those things are obviously income sources, right? What money is coming into the picture. Maybe it's Social Security, maybe there's a pension, maybe you're still working in some way. Is there rental income? There's a lot of possibilities. What are the expenses? This is the non-fun part that a lot of people either kind of do this or, they feel some self-blame. Oh, I can't believe I spent so much on that. But really, it's just data. We got to get into the scientist mode and like just looking at the numbers. The numbers aren't judging you. That's all up here. And then, what are the assets? What are the sources of wealth, value that could be turned into spendable dollars at some point? And looking at all those different pieces, yeah, it's not always fun. But again, going to someone who understands this, oh, this is in an IRA. Here's what that means tax wise, right? This is in a different type of account. Here's what it means in terms of investment risk. That kind of, even just sometimes doing that snapshot can reduce people's level of stress. Like, oh, okay, right? I've got this coming in, whatever it might be. I've seen lots of people, even just getting all that in view can really provide a measure of comfort.
Yeah, and right. And there is emotion around money, right? We all know that.
Oh,
And
yes. And it's
so
not well acknowledged in my world.
right. And I think, again, women versus men, how we've been brought up, how we've been thought about, thinking about money. And I think, this is a really important point. If you are in a partnership, if your spouse would unfortunately suddenly pass away,
Yes.
what are we talking about in terms of making sure the bills are getting paid? Do you know where everything is?
Yep.
If you have a financial advisor, are you also on those conversations with your partner or spouse? Just those are just some of the little things in terms of like really planning to age well that we sometimes don't think about.
Yeah, and it's perfectly fine in a couple to have a division of labor, and one is, in charge of for the most part keeping track of those things. That's fine, but you don't want the other partner or spouse to be completely in the dark and not even know who to call or know what the different pieces are, or like you said, how to pay the bills, because that can be ugly. My father-in-law passed away in October, but for the 2 years before he did, my mother-in-law had to step in and pay the bills and talk to the insurance companies and all that stuff, which was not her bailiwick at all. But she
Right.
really, in addition to being the caregiver in the home, she had to take that on. And it was a big learning curve.
Yeah, and we recently saw that just in my own neighborhood, older couple, they were in the early 80s, they were doing fine, everything was fine, and then he had a major health event and everything changed.
Yeah,
She had never gone in and looked. And I mean, smart lady, it's just to your
sure.
point, don't make that division of duties, particularly when it is around money.
Yeah,
This is a gift, and I would encourage, the men, if you are the guy in the household that is, doing this, I know there are some women that, right or wrong, are just like, well, I don't really know that much about it. I don't feel comfortable with it.
not
It is
interested.
right. It's a gift.
Yes.
The gift is if something happens, if for whatever reason I can't do this, I want to make sure you know enough, you know who to talk to, you're aware of what's going on so that you are protected.
Yep.
Uh, it's so incredibly important for all of us to have, just basic knowledge of whatever financially is going on in your household.
And I think we also need to mention that as we get older, we are more the target of fraudsters and scams. And having some more knowledge and awareness and comfort can give us at least a little bit of protection against that, right? If I spoke to the woman at AARP who's in charge of their whole fraud department. They have a lot of great resources. And she pointed out that if we have heard about a particular fraud or scam, we're 80% less likely to get taken in by it. So
Right.
talk about these things. There is no shame in, you know, being the person who got targeted by
Yeah.
the scam and fraud.
Yeah. And I will say, as a side note, we have our second webinar specifically on cybersecurity for seniors.
Good.
And coming up, we have one that is recorded. So if anybody's interested, the first one is available on our YouTube channel. I encourage you to go out and listen to
Yes.
what's said here. There's some really good advice. Because right, 100%. I think too, thinking through the solo lens, even as a couple, when you have one spouse, and I went to a town hall. I happened to be in the state of New York. They had a town hall around health and well-being that was run by the governor's office. And one of the people in the audience got up and said, I thought I had saved more than enough, but my wife has been in and out of the hospital now. There have been additional bills. Uh, I don't know if there's going to be enough money for me,
Right.
and so these are hard things to think about sometimes. At the same time, if you think about this through giving peace of mind to your spouse or loved one, or if you can't speak for yourself, whoever is making decisions for you, right? You may be a solo ager, but you still obviously should have a will or a trust and
Yeah.
power of attorney documents. And we're going to be talking about POAs next month,
Good.
a little bit more in depth around that. But it is fascinating how many people do not think about that. Well, if I can't talk for myself, who's making sure that my wishes are being carried out? And do they know what those wishes are?
Yes.
Right? Financially, are there specific things that have to get paid? If you're paying on a life insurance policy and that lapses,
Bad.
right? Or some of those things, or you've been paying on a long-term care insurance policy, maybe your spouse was doing that.
Yep.
If it lapses, you may lose out on those things. And that's why this awareness
Yes.
is so incredibly important. I mean, even having a checklist for each other. Like
Right.
if something should happen, hey, just so you're aware of X, Y, and Z. And whether that is that spouse or partner, or whether it is your trusted friend that's going to be that power of attorney,
Yep.
whoever it is. And
That's the
it,
other issue for the solos, right? Who is going to be the person who's stepping into that role? Because the default is, oh, my spouse is obviously my power of attorney. But when you're solo, who is that person? And you want to talk to that person and make sure that they know that that's their role, where to find the documents they're going to need, and that they know your wishes.
right. And financial POA, right? So we think about POA and we typically think of it through a medical lens. But in this case, since we're talking about, again, the finance piece of being a solo ager, you absolutely need to have a financial POA. And as part of this process,
Yep.
and to your point, do they have a real copy of it so that if they need to use it for your bank, whoever
Insurance
that
company.
person is, do they know how to pay your bills?
Right.
If you're in the hospital for, God forbid, but you might be, right? It happens. I got
Yeah,
sick,
of
I had a heart
course.
attack.
Yep.
Hopefully, but that doesn't mean you don't get back on your feet. But in the interim, who are the
Oh my,
trusted people that are going to make sure the rest of your life is protected and going to move on, properly? If you have a pet, right? Is there money for the pet food for whoever's going to take care of it? I mean, it seems like a really mundane thing, right? Or if you're in the hospital and your pet gets sick,
right.
like does that person who's responsible, know what the protocol is? And
Yeah,
they're simple steps. It doesn't take a whole lot of thought process for some of these things, but it can give you a huge amount of peace of mind.
absolutely. Yep.
And the last thing you want after some kind of a health crisis is to find out that money has gone away, that somebody who's gotten a hold of it, and this is it's terrible to say, this is a true story, and it was so upsetting for me to hear this because somebody that I knew, this was during COVID, and he was very ill. He was in the hospital, couldn't talk for 30 days, all of this stuff. His business partner went in and wiped out the entire account.
Oh,
So solo aging is not just about your own. If you own a business, this is another consideration in this process and thinking through that because he did recover and came back and the guy had left the country.
oh my gosh.
So yeah,
That's
right.
awful.
It is very, very bad. And I think, I'm sure you've heard it too. But this whole scam thing in terms of financial planning, there are people that have lost tens of hundreds of thousands of
Oh,
dollars.
absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah. And so it is part of this whole financial planning process. And again, to your point, this isn't a once and done thing. It's
No,
put a plan in place. We're going to check in. Is
you
all
got
the
to
service
revisit it, right? Is the person that you had named as POA no longer the best person to do that role?
right? And that can happen because people age out, right?
Yeah,
You put it all place 20 years. Oh, it's all in place. It was in place 20 or 30 years ago. Well, how old is that person? Where do they live now? Are they
right,
really going to be able to do that for you?
right.
Yeah. So it's just the pieces of the puzzle. And having, again, it doesn't take as much. It sounds super complicated, but the truth is, with the right guidance, you can get a good initial plan in place for yourself. And the goal is to have people that you can go back to and say, "Hey, I heard this," right? Or I have
Yeah,
a question about this, or this has changed. Somebody that you know is there that has your back.
right.
Uh, so if you were going to give people, like if you were going to say, look, if you're just starting, right, and you're
Hmm.
starting this process, three things you can do right now, in terms of getting ready as maybe potentially a solo ager.
Mm. I mean, some of this is not financial, but of course it's connected to the finances, right? I mean, how and where would you like to be living as you get older? And thinking about loneliness and isolation, right? That's a big problem, but it's also a big cause of bad health outcomes. So, how can you start to think about living somewhere maybe closer to others, ideally of lots of different generations, right? It's nice to hang out with people all our own age, but are they really going to be able to come and pick you up if you fall? Starting to think about that. And again, you don't have to the answers today. You can start to sit with the question, talk to some people, do a little research, maybe gather information about what your friends and family have done or older folks that you know have done. I think that's an important piece of it. And then, yeah, we got to start to look at the financial numbers. It can be really icky. And I'll tell you, I think one of the roadblocks people face is that it feels selfish to do this planning. Oh, it's all about me, 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 me. But it's not. It is a gift to everyone that you know, everyone who loves you and those around you who might be called to step in if you have things in place, if you've got it organized, if you've talked to people and they know how to find things, how to step in and help you. Because if nothing's in place, I mean, worst case scenario, we have a Gene Hackman type of situation,
Right.
or, you know, someone's going to have to step in with, even if it's the courts or, it can get really ugly. It's
Now, you
not
bring up a really good point. Again, there are, as if you would need care, and it could be, again, just the one-off piece and you get back on your feet, or it could be you get something like MS or Parkinson's or something, and again, I know these are hard things to think about, but to keep as independent as possible,
yeah.
you need to have a plan.
Mhm.
And then again, other people need to understand and know that plan, and it has to be legal. And then you need to understand the financial pieces of that to make sure that that plan could be executed. So
Yeah.
that's the whole point of like, um, doing those each individual piece and kind of thinking that through. One of the things that we really highly recommend is that if you do have an up-to-date financial POA, that you give it to your bank now and
Mm.
or give it to your financial advisor now. Um, don't wait because in some cases they're very good and they will honor that and it won't be a problem. But we definitely have seen cases where weeks, right? Their lawyers have to look at it. It
Right.
gets dragged around in that institution, whatever it is. And in the interim, somebody else may be having to pay bills coming out of their own pocket.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to that's a real gift. And it's one thing
Yes.
if your kids are doing it, but if you're a solo ager, are you asking a friend?
Right. Right.
Um,
And
you know,
sometimes these financial institutions, they won't take your POA form. They want you to fill out, in addition, their POA form. So having it in place before there's a crisis and before you can't sign that form is
right.
important.
So it's a really good, right. If you do it, you get it, you send it, hey, is there any problem with this? Because then you're going to know.
Yeah.
And then everything's in place should something happen.
Should something happen. And we all hear about disasters every day, right? I mean, this stuff does happen.
Right. Well, and I think too, when we talk about it's not just when we talk about where we're going to live, and all those financial considerations. Yes, it's taxes, it's renovation of a home, it's do you have a generator, right? People don't think about these kinds of things. If you don't have one, and you have an electric lift in your house, as an example, or refrigerated medications,
Yeah.
and but you don't have a generator and the power goes out for 2 or 3 days, what is that going to mean for you and your family? So there are things, that's why again, you want the arms around you to ask the right questions, so again, you're not going to get caught unprepared. So I think the big question always is, well, when should I start planning? uh,
I mean, and the answer is always, well, yesterday, or failing that, today. And I don't know. I'm self-diagnosed adult ADHD, and these things can feel so overwhelming. But, starting to gather the information, keeping it in one place, and starting to tick off step by step, finding those resources. And then, like we said, it's not necessarily once and done. Invest in this. We've all learned to invest in our health and our brain health, and maybe we're doing Sudoku or crosswords or, making sure we get out and get our walks. This is another investment in our long-term health that really is crucial. And if it's going to help you to have some outside accountability or partnership to do it, I mean, you can find yourself a friend, a money buddy, someone who won't judge you, who you can learn together and do these things and have some accountability, or you can find professionals.
Oh, wonderful. Well, as always, these sessions go very, very quickly. We haven't touched on every single piece of the puzzle, but we are delighted to be in partnership with Stephanie and her team. And so if you have additional questions about solo aging, please reach out to us. We're happy to get you connected to Stephanie. And she's happy to give you a free conversation just to get you started and hopefully give you more peace of mind. So, as always, whether you are caring for someone or whether you're planning ahead for yourself, thinking about aging well and reducing those risks is something that we can all do. We are here as a collective partnership to make sure that that can happen for you and your loved ones. So, always feel free to reach out to us. That first call is always free. We love to help people live a better life. And we invite you to join us next month because we are going to dig deep into POAs. What are they? What should be in those documents? Who you should be listing in there, and a little bit more about who should be having access to them. So we want to thank you, Stephanie, so much again for all the wonderful, wonderful advice and insights. And we hope all of you have a wonderful day. And again, if you need help or have questions about caregiving, we're here to stand with you. Thank you so much.